If we can do that somewhat quietly, as we go to our table, be cognizant of everybody's time we need to serve. On behalf of myself, Nathan Street, the Public Policy Chair, and Vice Chair Pat Solheim, first of all, thank you for coming, for participating, and being part of this candidate forum. I have a couple things I need to read before we begin and let you know kind of how the process is going to work today. On behalf of the Public Policy Committee and the Homer Lakes Area Chamber of Commerce, we want to publicly acknowledge that our Chamber President is serving as a campaign chair for one of the candidates on his own personal time. Because of that conflict, the Chamber President was not involved in the creation of today's format or questions. None of the candidates have seen the specific questions other than the general topics to be covered until they arrive today. A subcommittee of the Public Policy Committee created the format for the forum and the questions. A little bit about the forum format. The forum will be co-moderated by myself and Vice Chair Pat Solheim. Each forum has been allotted 45 minutes. If there's time left at the end, we will take questions from the audience. We ask that those questions be asked that can be addressed by both candidates. The forum will be videotaped and posted on the Chamber website after the event for those who are unable to attend for viewing the forum at their convenience at a later date. The first half will be the House District 17B with incumbent Representative Mary Sawatzky and the challenger Dave Baker. The second half of the forum will be Canada County Commissioner District 3 candidates with incumbent Dean Shuck and challenger Raleigh Nissen. The format for our forum will be allowed each candidate a 2-minute opening statement on why they are running for office, followed by the questions that each candidate will be given 2 minutes to respond to. The questions will alternate between the candidates. There is a timekeeper and a 1-minute, 30-second stop flashcards will be posted so each candidate will know their time limits. Candidates, please respect the timekeeper and stop when instructed to do so. Then each candidate will wrap up with a 2-minute closing. The topic areas for the respective races were given to the candidates in advance, and they received the actual questions once again upon their arrival and registration here today. At this time, I'll turn it over to Vice Chair Pat Solheim for the first 4 questions.
Also, we'll let you know that the order of today was determined by a coin flip between the candidates before the forum started. Our first question, please explain to us why you're running for the House of Representatives 17B seat. And going first will be Mary.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming today and participating in this very important legislative event. It's important to have people involved in government and local government as well as where you work and play. And so thank you all for taking time today. I'm running for House of Representatives again. I won 2 years ago, so I completed my first year in the House, and I am running because there is more work to be done to help families, local businesses, and to build a stronger middle class. And by doing those, working on those things, I believe all encapsulizes who you are, because you are all here as chamber members, and you're concerned about jobs, economy, and what makes our area or region move, and that's important to you. As we combine all those things together, I believe that when we take care of transportation, education, and people, jobs follow. And I would probably, as we go through a little bit, I guess looking through some of the questions, they won't necessarily weave in and out, but when we invest in transportation, we, for instance, in Highway 23 with the environmental impact study that is going to be done and completed at the end of December 15, or 2015, the jobs will follow because we will create jobs with that. When we are taking care of education and our students, that means that our little guys that are learning will have better jobs as we are focusing on where they're going for post-secondary education. And then also when we invest in people and take care of people, we don't have to be cognizant of, we're taking care of them, and when we're doing that, then we are representing our people in Kennedy County, Minnesota, in Minnesota.
And as my first official duty as moderator, I have to acknowledge that I already flubbed. And my apologies to the candidates. I incorrectly indicated who should start. but we will continue. My apologies on that. I have a lot of notes scribbled here, and I obviously went to the wrong one. So that's my fault. I take responsibility for that. So again, my apologies to the candidates. I'll turn it over to Candidate Baker, and then we will continue with the correct order. So the second question will go back to Representative Sawatzky to answer. So apologies.
We're going to have to penalize you, Pat,
I know.
next time.
Dock my pay.
Thank you, and thanks Pat and Nathan for running the debate today, discussion forum. Like every election, they're all important, and this one is no different. If you don't know me, my name is Dave Baker. I've lived in the area for 20 years. In fact, I live right next door to this property on Pheasant Run here for the last 20 years. And I've been in my own business for 14 years. I'm running for office because I love Minnesota, and I love what Minnesota stands for. For a number of years, I've sat on some statewide boards, the Minnesota Chamber, the Restaurant Association, and I had the opportunity to kind of see statewide what happens when decisions get made on the state level and how it affects lives, how it affects children, how it affects roads, how it affects tax policy. And when the election ended and Mary won last in 2012, I had the opportunity to sit down with Mary and at the time Lyle Kunin, and we sat down and talked about my desire to want to be there for Mary, to talk to her about what's it like to be a small business guy. Just if you have any questions, call me. The economy was just coming out of a very fragile state in 2012. And I wanted to be there to make sure she just at least knew what it was like for me to be an employer. And I wanted to give her that advice, that suggestions. And we have had the dialogue over the time that she's been in office. I will say that I'm not afraid to pick up the phone and talk to any representative. I think it's what we are here for. But when it comes to the end of the days, if we fast forward 7 months after 2013, it was a disastrous year for business in Minnesota. Private sector really got nailed hard. And I was appalled by the movement to not allow private sector to have the strength that they should have had in Minnesota. So that to me was something that was not, for me, held with high esteem. So that to me was my aha moment.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, back to our official order. Candidates, please name the 3 most critical issues you believe the state faces today and explain why you believe these are the most pressing issues. Here.
In the 2 years that I have been representing this district, I have been invited to more mental health issues than any other issue. Jobs, roads, but mental health. And I think, I know that mental health needs to be addressed. We have started mental health issues with some of the legislation that we passed in the past 2 years. But we have a bottleneck that is, the state has failed in taking care of the issues that we've had in the state of Minnesota. The country is having some of the same issues, but we're talking about Minnesota. So when we shut down the state hospitals, regional treatment centers, we built the 16-bed facilities, and some of those are defunct as now, and then the one that we do have in our community isn't set up the way that it was supposed to be set up. So I believe that mental health is one of the, and we're shipping Minnesotans to North Dakota, to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We're taking our money out of state to take care of what we haven't been able to do in Minnesota. Another important issue is transportation. We have $50 billion worth of needs in the next 20 years. $50 billion in roads and bridges. I'm not talking about the metro, I'm talking about out here. We need to fill Highway 23. And when we talk about efficiencies, that the 5% efficiencies that we talk about that MnDOT needs to do, I want you to know that a 5% efficiency increase would be about $43 million. Do you know that between New London and Paynesville is $50 to $70 million to complete that 7-mile gap? And then on the other side of Paynesville from 294 is $70 to $90 million. So a 5% efficiency is great, but we'll get about maybe 6 miles. The other piece that I think is very important that we have to look at is the railroad situation, which creates jobs.
Thank you. Again, to restate the question, name the 3 most critical issues you believe the state faces and explain why you believe these are the most pressing issues.
In 2 minutes, it's hard to get a lot of them, but there's a lot of priorities. I think transportation is definitely going to be a big item this year. I personally think $43 million is a lot of money that we can use, and I think it should be looked at as efficiencies are important. I know that contractors can haul more gravel if they have more permits to allow them to do that on the roads with more access. I think that makes sense because it's going to save us, the taxpayers, a lot of money. I also think that tax policy has to be seriously looked at. Policy that keeps us growing and not drowning in our taxes. It's too high in Minnesota. So I'm not here to say that I will never sign a no tax increase pledge. That's foolish. But we need to have reasonable tax rates that will provide Minnesotans good services with affordable taxes and a place where we can create jobs. That's what's really key in my opinion, and it's growing private sector jobs. We have to find ways to lessen the requirements of permitting, time constraints, regulations that will slow down private sector jobs to want to grow here in Minnesota when they can do it a lot quicker in South Dakota, a lot cheaper. We just got to make sure that our environment of job growth is here. So those to me are key roles in Minnesota: transportation, private sector job growth, and good, smart tax policy.
We'll move on to question 3. Tell us your position on the expectations of political party needs versus district needs. And if you can, please be specific and include examples that support your position. Dave, you'll go first on this question.
Sure. Party versus district is an easy answer for me. To me, I will vote. I've never been there, but I will vote with the 3 C's. My conscience first. If it doesn't believe with my core beliefs in pro-life and protecting the Second Amendment right and all these things that are important to me as a Christian and as a Republican, and that's important to me, that's number 1. The second decision maker is my constituents. If they are not going to want to, as a group, as a whole, is this right for my district? Then I will have to re-examine that. If it all is in line, the third one will be my party or my caucus. I think that's kind of lower on the totem pole. Mary has a 94% voting record with Speaker Thiessen. And to me, that's not representing our district as well as it should. I know we're going to lean much more towards our party. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that's not representative of our district, which is pretty much Candy County. That concerns me. That's something that I would want to make sure we look at. Examples. 3 examples would be. I think because of the party line stuff, Mary was pulled hard in directions. To build the Senate office building, I think, was a huge mistake, and it was pushed hard by the Democrats. I don't think that was good use of our public funding. I can't think of anything else off the top with the 3 other examples, but to me what it comes down to is common sense. What makes the most sense for our area is reasonable taxes, it's job growth, and we've got to make sure that we continue that train, or we are going to be in trouble. So, and it's not about, because the Democrats have a lot of good ideas, and so do Republicans. I don't care who has the idea. If it's a good idea, let's explore it. So I'm not going to get hung up on party line stuff.
Again, to restate the question, what is your position on the expectations of the political party needs versus district needs?
Thank you for that question. I think clearly some of that social issues that was presented in the constitutional amendment, which drove the next session. I truly do not believe you would have had the marriage amendment issue as an issue in 2013-14 had it not been on the constitutional amendment. I clearly represented my district. When I went to St. Paul saying I'm interested in running for House of Representatives, and I said, but this is who I am, and this is how I'm going to, my convictions and how I'm going to vote in X, Y, and Z. That was fine. Quite contrary to what happens on the other side of the aisle. With the marriage amendment, if we'll just talk about that for a minute, there were 4 Republicans that voted with the Democrats. And one who was a Tom Emmer advocate, actually manager for him for years, David Fitzsimmons, never even got to speak at his caucus. He was ousted from the party. He was ineffective for the rest of the session. Jennifer Lewin, wonderful representative from the metro area. In fact, she helped me a lot with the Sunday Liquor Day sales, and I said, Jennifer, I can't vote for this. My liquor stores in Wilmer do not want, in Mankato County, do not want me to vote for this. She said, you can't then, don't represent your district. So, but she got primaried. She got primaried by a Tea Partier because she wasn't as conservative as they wanted her to be. Same thing happened in 2008 when they overturned the transportation bill, and Representative Ron Earhart got ousted from the Republican Party because they overrode Governor Plenty, and he is now the city chair of transportation as a Democrat. I actually, when we talk about the Second Amendment, it was the Democrats that helped hold down the left side of the Democrats, and so you can thank me for helping to support the Second Amendment.
Thank you. Our fourth question. The federal government will offer money to states to create or participate in new programs, but that money often comes with strings attached and often requires that the state spend its own money as well. When should the state say no to these programs, and when should the state say yes? And going first would be Representative Sawatzky.
Well, I think everything comes with strings attached. That just happens. When we raise our children, you behave at the supper table, you can eat your dessert, or your food, you can have dessert. Everything comes with attachments. And so, as specifically speaking of, that happens every day in education. I'm an educator. We have to abide by different rules and regulations and from the federal government. And yeah, would I like to not have to do all the paperwork that we have to do, or would the nurses like to not have to sit at the computer and record everything that they do for every second that they're with the patient? But you have to do some of those things because that's what is required for checks and balances. So I guess with having sort of a broad question as this, that's a little bit hard to define as to when are you going to have strings attached or not. I think we have to be accountable. Absolutely, we all have to be accountable. Everybody has to be accountable for what pencil, or how many, if it's talking, sometimes just talking about how many boxes of paper clips that we use, because that's what it gets to when you're in education. You have to be accountable for that. So I think that it's a little bit of a question, and but I appreciate that people understand that there are strings attached when you give money or grant money away. You have to work for it. Or if you have incentives or tax credits, you have to work for it. There's something that you have to do and be responsible in following through with providing monies, and especially if we're using taxpayers' monies to provide you with a grant or a loan or tax forgiveness. There should be some strings attached.
Okay. And again, to repeat the question, the federal government will offer money to states to create or participate in new programs, but that money comes with strings attached and often requires that the state spend its own money as well. When should the state say no to these programs? When should it say yes?
I think a lot of those projects are very project specific. We won't get Highway 23 done as quickly if we don't probably get any federal funding. Now, to me, roads and bridges and military and very core basic things are what our federal government is here for. And I would say that if we had federal monies for finishing Highway 23, I think that'd be a great idea. We maintain it going forward, but it's got to be done. I think that's a good use of federal dollars. When I sat on the Utility Commission recently, we had an opportunity to take advantage of the Obama money, the incentives that he was providing for companies to throw out federal dollars to get things rolling during that tough time. I was not in favor of having utilities do a solar farm, because even if it was a bunch of, you call it free money, it's not free money, it's our money. But if we get some money from the federal government to say, let's set up the solar farm out here, it's still the highest cost kilowatt we're going to have after it's all done. So it didn't make sense for Wilmer Utilities to do that project. And I think we went through that process, looked at it, it wasn't a good thing for us, so no. I think in a general sense, less government intrusion is better for our lives. I believe strongly that you need it at times. We need our protection of our military. So, there's some good things there. We're American, and we have to remember that we pay taxes. We should get some of that money back. but there's certain things that I think we really have to say no to. I think our states are required, and they should be the ones responsible for teaching our kids, not the federal side of things. And I'm glad that it is the way it is. But so on many occasions, federal side of funding we should say no, but it's project specific.
Thank you.
Dave, you'll go first on this question. Over the past year, there are companies that have said or are thinking about leaving Minnesota. Locally, we have heard from professionals, including accountants and bankers, that there are individuals who have left the state or are considering leaving the state. What policies need to be enacted to retain and attract businesses and individuals to Minnesota? Dave, you're first.
I think first of all, it's just not penalizing success. I think we all know some people in this county that after the 2013 session, when there was a $2.1 billion tax increase to fill a $600 million shortfall, a lot of folks got penalized hard. And their decisions as a family or as a company were, we can stay and pay the tax, about 20% tax on their marginal tax over the $250,000 that it would be, or we could leave. So my concern is that one accounting firm, through those discussions, one accounting firm shared a lot of good information for me running for office, knowing what I have to do. 38 clients went to one firm, asked them to run the numbers. If we stayed in Minnesota or if we left, what would happen? Of those 38 families or clients, 10 of those decided to leave at the end of 2013. They picked up and they left. Doesn't mean they picked up their business, doesn't mean they picked up everything. They still have some operating businesses here. But what it's going to do is, out of those 10 people, roughly 25% of the folks that asked from that one firm left. They're not coming back. They'll come back and visit us, but that's about it. So we lost all that income from them, the personal income tax. So my concern is, if we don't turn the tide on that issue alone, we are going to lose a lot more friends sitting in these rooms of successful people that have invested their lives into their businesses, that have been they're forced and felt like Minnesota doesn't want them. I just think that's wrong tax policy, and I think that we have to stop that momentum. Mary mentioned a lot of good things that the priorities are, but her last priority was, and then the jobs will come. Mine is the other way around. We've got to have jobs to get them to stay here. That's where it all begins, is with good private sector jobs.
Question, Mary. Over the past year, there are companies that have said or are thinking about leaving Minnesota. Locally, we have heard from professionals, including accountants and bankers, that there are individuals who have left the state or are considering to leave the state. What policies need to be enacted to retain and attract businesses and individuals to Minnesota? Representative Sawatzky.
I also was invited right away at one accounting firm, and then Senator Coonan and I went and visited again. And the fact is people decide at different times in their lives to live someplace else for 6 months, 1 day, and that has happened in the past, and it will continue to happen in the future. This is nothing new. Do we want to, the other piece is companies are maybe leaving to go to foreign lands, and that's a federal issue that we are doing, that there is an aversion status that they're working on right now for an exchange to incentivize companies not to do that. And but we as Minnesotans are proud to be Minnesotans. And it's funny because when I go to the doors, people give me the same answer, and I said, "Who's left? Tell me, name the person who's left for the 7 people that firm told me is going to leave." And they can only come up with one name, and then they won't even name that name. And then I said, "Well, I'll name that name for you." And nobody can tell me anybody else but one name. And so I say, "Well, yeah." And I visited with that gentleman, and he's not originally from Minnesota, which is okay. But he also had said to me face to face that he couldn't afford to keep his airplane here in Minnesota. And I said, "Well, that's the difference between you and me. I fill up my gas tank, you fill up your airplane." And then he indicated that his wife was going to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I said, "Sioux Falls is a nice community. My mother-in-law lives there. I have 2 brothers that live in South Dakota." I said, "Enjoy the Sioux Falls Canaries." Well, about 2 weeks later, somebody says, well, he didn't go to Sioux Falls, he's in Texas. And I said, well, there you go.
Thank you. Mary, you'll go first on this. Each year, the legislative session rolls along without agreement on key issues, only to have the top 5 people in power, majority leaders and minority leaders in both houses, along with the governor, negotiate the final agreement. Is this appropriate? If yes, please explain your role as a representative of the Wilmer Lakes area in those discussions. If no, how do we change it? Representative Sawatzky.
Throughout the session, we are busy, throughout the session is kind of broken up into different pieces. The beginning of the sessions, you have many committee meetings, and you meet with as many constituents and groups and organizations that you can fit into your schedule. And from that comes the issues that we bring to the table, including the State Chamber of Commerce. And the State Chamber of Commerce drives a lot of what happens at the Capitol. So it's a powerful group, and we look at those issues, and throughout the session, then when we get more towards the floor, there's a lot that happens, not just necessarily at the very end. So there's a lot of things that are happening that we're voting on in legislation that is passed. For instance, when we repealed the B2B taxes early in March, that happened, and that didn't wait for leadership to decide whether or not we were going to do that at the end of the session. But there are many things that as you go through, when you have to look at, I remember one of our past superintendents saying, well, why can't you just finish up with the education bill? Well, it all ties together. How much you spend in education, how much you spend in health and human services, will all affect how much you're going to spend in transport, whatever, the whole budget. So it all comes down to, and quite frankly, a maneuvering, just like you all do in your homes, when you decide what you're going to do with your budget. You might come up with your family together and say, well, where are we going to go for vacation, or how are we going to spend our money this year or this month? And then ultimately, people have to make some final decisions. And then there's negotiating, because you negotiate with the other side, because you have to have the votes. For instance, with the bonding bill, when it's geographically diverse and appeasing to all parts of the state, but you have to negotiate with the other side of the aisle to make sure that you have your votes.
Each year, the legislative session rolls along without agreement on any key issues, only to have the top 5 people in power, majority leaders, minority leaders in both houses, along with the governor, negotiate the final agreement. Is this appropriate? If yes, please explain your role as a representative of the Wilmer Lakes area in those discussions. If no, how do we change it? Dave.
Well, not having been there, I can't tell you what it's like to be at the end of the session. You're trying to get things wrapped up, but what it comes down to, in my opinion, is leadership, leadership, leadership. And if you're leading and in the faces of the right people of your caucus, and talking to the committee meetings and talking about why this is so important, my goal would certainly be to try to make sure before we get to this sort of end of the session crisis, and people are talking about shutdowns, and people are talking about horrible things that we don't want. I think it's all about how did we get there? And if we've got the wrong people in leadership, that's a problem. To me, I wouldn't want to see 5 people deciding the big decisions at the very end when 134 representatives have worked their tails off all session long, and then it all comes down to that. You know, that's kind of what happened with the last 2013 session. We all thought the B2B taxes weren't going to happen in 2013. We thought, and I say we, the Minnesota Chamber and other business groups thought, whew, the governor said it wasn't going to be a part of that. But at the very end of that decision-making process, the B2B taxes went right back in. There was a number of them, 5 or 6 or 7. And they repealed what they approved the session before. And it still cost the farmers and the folks that had to pay that storage tax and the repair tax, it still cost them January through April. So they repealed what they put into place, which should have never been there in the beginning. So to me, this whole concept of you let folks that either have been there the longest or they're the sharpest with the rules and all this other kind of stuff doesn't make sense to me. And if I get the chance to go there, I want to make sure that my voice is loud and clear, and that my leadership, whoever it is going to know exactly what I think and what I feel.
Thank you. Thank you. Dave, you'll go first on this. You're not literally asking your opponent a question, but if you could ask your opponent one question about an issue, what would it be?
So why I'm not answering this
You're not literally asking a question.
I'm not asking her a question.
No. But if you could ask her a question, you didn't want to get into a debate.
We agree on that.
So if I could ask a question that she's not going to answer. Okay, that's all right, because it's time. I guess if I had the chance to ask this question to Mary, it would be, you know, Minshire is a mess, and everybody kind of recognizes it, and we've got work to fix it. But there was a vote that she approved to give bonuses to the people that put Minshire together before it was even launched, and I would have liked to have asked her the question of why she approved that vote.
Thank you. Representative Sawatzky, if you could literally ask your opponent a question about an issue, what would it be?
I would like to know how my opponent would help move the chamber, the Minnesota State Chamber, along with supporting transportation. The National Chamber is on board with the federal government to pass a transportation bill. And so I'm curious as to how and why we can't move Minnesota Chamber of Commerce to join the coalition of other Move Minnesota coalitions to pass a transportation bill. Our infrastructure is struggling. We haven't taken care of it. When the general contractors were out here a couple weeks ago, Commissioner Zelli, with the issue about the axles, were there, and he says, you know, the axles is the problem. It's the weight of the truck is still the same when you go over a bridge, and those bridges can't handle the weight of the bridge, the vehicles. Now, if you want to disagree with that, we'll have a discussion about that. But if the Commissioner Zelli is talking about weights and axles, and I agree, but it's also a federal issue. I wish we could have conformity federally. But so I would like to see how that would transform, because I do know that you walked out of the room during that discussion when I don't think you were present during that discussion when the general contractors were there. And that was an issue where somebody in the back of the room had mentioned that if the federal government is on board for transportation bill, why isn't the federal, the National Chamber of Commerce, why isn't the State Chamber of Commerce on board?
Thank you. You'll each be given 2 minutes for closing comments. Representative Sawatzky, you will go first.
Again, thank you. Again, thank you all for coming today. It's been an exciting 2 years for Minnesota. I believe that we're moving Minnesota forward for families, for business, for small business, large business. Part of the large business or the small business incentives that I helped with was I passed a bill for trade offices, and then we opened 3 trade offices overseas: Germany, South Korea, and Brazil. In the first quarter of the Germany's trade office being open, $5 billion worth of trade was exchanged. So I am very much in tune with small business. We put more money into Minnesota Investment Fund, Job Creation Fund, innovation, the Southwest Initiative Foundation, which I think that, you know, government, it does have a place. And Dave, you participated in the Southwestern Foundation Initiative loan. And so I think that you agree that there is a place for government. We built up small business development centers for small businesses to access some support and help when they are starting businesses, because you can't afford it all. So there are centers throughout the state of Minnesota. And also we have innovation vouchers by pilot projects for small businesses, as well as the business development public infrastructure grants, which our communities all can participate in. When we are talking about Minshire, I would also like to clarify that, you know, the first 2 years that Minshire the exchange was presented to Minnesota, when the Republicans were in charge, nothing happened. We had 2 years wasted time, and then in 2013, Minshire was enacted. So, and hurried through.
Thank you. Dave, closing comments, 2 minutes.
Again, thank you everybody for being here today. It's a pleasure to be amongst folks and colleagues that I do business with a lot. I have to make sure that when a legislator goes to office, they have a record. Mary has a record, and the record is what speaks loud and clear. Mary is not a friend to small business. She's not a friend to growing private sector jobs. I don't think she understands the role that we play, and I think that concerns me greatly. And that again is why I decided to run against somebody that I like, somebody that I see in the community a lot, but her priorities are wrong and she doesn't understand what it's like to be in business and why it's so important to grow jobs. So to me, the things that she has mentioned that she's doing for business, the bigger picture is so greater than that. You know, we have to do much more, and creating jobs is what I want to do. I want to get in there and I want to roll my sleeves up. And I'm also a leader. I haven't seen great leadership from our legislator. Again, I think I can bring a room and I can get people together and I can connect the dots and I can tell my story in a way that people will listen to. I think I can get the job done. I think I can do a really good job communicating and leading and showing how we can do that, and people will want to fall behind me and let's go do this. That's what I think I can do. It's what I do every day with my managers at my business. My managers are held accountable for leading and training, and if they don't do that, that's my biggest hot button. So if I have the opportunity to serve, I would tell you that will be some of my qualities that I'll do my very best to represent our area. And again, I thank you for your time today.
Thank you. We'll take about a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and have the Candido County District 3 board.